Granthraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Jai Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 8, titled Questions by King Parikshit. Text number 25. Atra pramanam hi bhavan paramesti yatatmabhu appare chanutistanti purve sampurvajai Atra pramanam hi bhavan paramesti yatatmabhu appare chanutistanti purve sampurvajai kritam atra pramanam hi bhavan paramesti yatatmabhu appare chanutistanti Purve sampurvajai kritam. Word for word translation. Atra, in this matter. Pramanam, evidential facts. He, certainly. Bhavan, yourself. Paramesti, Brahma, the creator of the universe. Yatha, as. Atma Bhu, born directly from the Lord. Appare, others. Cha, only. Anutistanti, just to follow. Purve sam, as a matter of custom. Purvajay, knowledge suggested by a previous philosopher. Kritam, having been done. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. O great sage, you are as good as Brahma, the original living being. Others follow custom only, as followed by the previous philosophical speculators. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chaksurmanitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Purport. It may be argued that Sukadeva Goswami is not the only authority of perfect knowledge and transcendence, because there are many other sages and their followers. Contemporary to Vyasadeva, or even prior to him, there were many other great sages such as Gautama, Kanada, Jaimini, Kapila, and Astavakra. And all of them have presented a philosophical path by themselves. Patanjali is also one of them, and all these 6 great rishis have their own way of thinking, exactly like the modern philosophers and mental speculators. The difference between the 6 philosophical paths put forward by the renowned sages above mentioned and that of Sukadeva Goswami as presented in the Srimad Bhagavatam is that all the 6 sages mentioned above speak the facts according to their own thinking, but Sukadeva Goswami presents the knowledge which comes down directly from Brahmaji, who is known as Atma Bhu, or born and educated by the Almighty Personality of Godhead. So we'll discuss a bit from this paragraph, then we'll continue on with the purport. So firstly, Prabhupada, in this first paragraph, is hinting at the power of the parampara system. One time, Prabhupada, he said that Vedic technology means the parampara system. And Prabhupada is distinguishing us coming down in the line of the Brahma Sampradaya, taking knowledge through disciplic succession, compared to other philosophers putting forward their theory. And Prabhupada says that there are 6 other philosophical paths presented by other rishis such as Gautama, Kanada, Jaimini, Kapila, Astavakra, and Prabhupada says also Patanjali. But Prabhupada writes that what's the difference between these other 6 paths and what's compared to our path, which is coming down from Brahma to Narada, from Narada to Vyasa, and then all the way to Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada explains that these other different paths put forward by these 6 rishis, they don't follow the parampara system, they don't follow disciplic succession, which is coming down directly from Krishna himself. Rather, they make up a path or a philosophical path just out of their own mental speculation. And because it's done just out of their own mental speculation, it automatically loses value. Because as we hear many times, us as conditioned souls, we have 4 defects: imperfect senses, tendency to be illusioned, we make mistakes, and we have a cheating propensity. So if a conditioned soul has these 4 defects, then anything manufactured by the conditioned soul will naturally have some defect in it. So therefore, these philosophical paths put forward by these other rishis, and Prabhupada even writes that even in the modern age, you see different yogis and gurus and babajis and other spiritual groups that will sprout up not only in India but also in the Western world. You see so many different yoga societies, yoga schools, and different gurus and so on. They sprout up in the Western world and in India. But all these different groups, we see that none of them are coming down in any bona fide disciplic succession. So the founder or the guru or the personality, whichever personality that starts up these so-called spiritual groups in the Western world or in India, it's bound to have defects in it. Because it's just done out of a normal conditioned soul's mental speculation. So not only in the previous ages with these 6 philosophical paths, with these 6 sages such as Gautama, Kanada, Jaimini, but even in the present modern age, where we see so many spiritual groups and gurus coming along, Prabhupada says they're all defective, and one should, instead of following their defective path, one should take the proper path, which is free from defects, which is coming down from Krishna himself. And that's the beauty, or that's the power of the disciplic section of the parampara. The beauty of the parampara is how the parampara system works is it comes direct, it starts from Krishna himself. And Krishna being the Supreme Lord, naturally whatever he manufactures is free from any defects. And Krishna passes on to Brahma, Brahma passes on to Narada. And the parampara system is so designed that the knowledge, if it's passed down in disciplic succession, it doesn't get tampered with, and the same effect will be there. Meaning, like Prabhupada, once he was explaining, that we shouldn't think or we shouldn't lament that, Krishna appeared 5,000 years ago and Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, Krishna gave his association to Arjuna. I was born 5,000 years later, I missed out on Krishna's association. If only I was present 5,000 years ago, I would have directly heard Bhagavad Gita right from the lotus mouth of Krishna. You know, Arjuna and all these other warriors in Kurukshetra, they had the fortune of hearing Bhagavad Gita directly from the mouth of Krishna. But now I'm just reading, you know, whatever is recorded. It's not the same effect as being directly in front of Krishna. But Prabhupada explains that actually, by the power of this parampara system, by the technology of this parampara system, the same effect that Arjuna had in hearing Bhagavad Gita directly from Krishna, the same effect, the same potency is still present when we read Bhagavad Gita as it is translated by a bona fide teacher coming in disciplic succession, such as Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada explains there is no difference. What potency Arjuna was feeling, what effect Arjuna was experiencing on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, by hearing Bhagavad Gita directly from Krishna, we can experience the same effect. We can get the same benefit. The same potency is there when we pick up Bhagavad Gita as it is and read. There's no difference. And that's one hint Prabhupada gives of the power of this disciplic succession. We should never think that there's a difference in hearing directly from an acharya or hearing directly from a guru coming in disciplic succession and hearing directly from Krishna. There's actually no difference. The potency or the effect is the same. And Krishna, he emphasizes this in his teachings to Uddhava in 11th canto Bhagavatam. In one verse, Krishna says to Uddhava that Acharya mam vijaniyan navamanyeta karichit. In this verse, Krishna, he himself is saying that the acharya or the guru or the bona fide teacher coming in disciplic succession, he should be considered as good as myself, and he should be given the same respect as one offers to me. So why is it that the spiritual master gets the same respect as Krishna? Why is it that he should be dealt with as one would deal with Krishna? Because he's the representative of Lord. Because he just simply repeats whatever Krishna is saying. He's just as good as Krishna. And Prabhupada, he would give the example of a fire rod. Fire rod is not fire, but if you put the fire rod in fire long enough, then the fire rod will start acquiring the same qualities as the fire. And at a certain point of time, the fire rod will become exactly just like the fire. Just like when you put the hand in the fire, your hand will get burnt, you'll feel the heat. In the same way, if an iron rod has been in the fire long enough, it will act exactly just like fire. You touch the iron rod, immediately you'll get burned. Immediately you feel the heat. So that's how the parampara system works. That's the potency of the spiritual master. He acts just as good as Krishna because he's constantly associating with Krishna. He immediately acquires all the qualities of Krishna. And this is a very big responsibility the spiritual master or the guru holds. The responsibility of the guru is that he has to repeat whatever has been taught by his guru as it is, without changing it up, without putting his own interpretation. And if you think about it, it's actually not such an easy thing to do, to repeat the message as it is, because the general tendency is that we want to put our own spin in things. We want to put our own, thoughts and ideas into things and present ourselves forward. And to just repeat the message as it is, as it was taught to us by our authorities, by our spiritual master, it requires some level of humility. The general tendency of a conditioned soul is that he wants to put forward his own ideas, own speculations, and he wants to get, name, fame for creating something new, something different. And we see that in our society with, like in university, for example, after you do your graduate, you go to a master's, and then when you go to PhD, you have to do a thesis. And the thesis is judged by how different is your topic of research. When you discover something new, something different, or you write some article or thesis on some different topic, then that's considered as something very nice, something very great. So that's the general tendency of conditioned soul, that he wants to present his own ideas, he wants to get name, fame for doing something different. So actually, to present the message as it is, as it was taught to us by our authorities, by our spiritual master, it requires a level of sense control, it requires humility. And that's why the spiritual master is glorified, because he gives us the actual medicine as it is without tampering with it. And Prabhupada, he explains this point at the introduction of Bhagavad Gita. He explains that before he wrote Bhagavad Gita as it is, there were hundreds of other editions of Bhagavad Gita already published and already present, not only in India, but in the Western world. There were already hundreds of translations and purports given for Bhagavad Gita by different personalities. But Prabhupada writes that although there's so many editions of Bhagavad Gita at the present moment all around the world, there's not one devotee of Krishna outside of India. But then Prabhupada writes, after I wrote this Bhagavad Gita as it is, the pure message of Krishna as it is, without tampering it, Bhagavad Gita coming down in disciplic succession, following the parampara system, now you see the effect. Just by publishing this one book, Bhagavad Gita as it is, immediately there's devotees, hundreds and thousands of devotees all around the world, in all the different cities, in all the different nations. In this way, Prabhupada very nicely, very powerfully, with great logic, very scientifically, he proves the power of disciplic succession, the power of parampara system. On one side, you have all these so-called philosophers, gurus, and leaders of spiritual groups who are translating Bhagavad Gita using their own mental speculation, putting their own ideas. And what's the effect? There's not a single devotee of Krishna outside. No one's heart is being transformed. But when Prabhupada writes Bhagavad Gita as it is, immediately you see, just, in the matter of weeks, years, all around the world there's devotees of Krishna. Devotees in China, devotees in Russia, devotees in Europe, devotees in America, South America, Australia, Africa, India, all over the world. So that's the power of the parampara system. If someone just presents the message as it is, the message will have the same potency as was present 5,000 years ago when Krishna was speaking. Just like we hear in Chaitanya Charitamrita, or even in Bhagavatam, the power of Narad Muni's preaching. Narad Muni's preaching is so powerful, like we see in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Narad Muni, he comes across Mrigari the hunter. And this Mrigari the hunter, he's so degraded that he half kills animals. Instead of killing them fully, he just injures them and makes them suffer in pain. And then, as Mrigari would watch these half-killed animals suffering and wriggling in pain with blood coming out, he would feel great pleasure. Chaitanya Charitamrita explains. And this is how low Mrigari was. And he's been doing this for his whole life. His whole life, he was just trained like this by his father. Mrigari explains that since from childhood, I've been trained by my father to do like this, to half-kill animals and hunt like this. And when I see, Mrigari is explaining this to Narad Muni, when I see these animals suffering in pain and wriggling in pain, I feel a great sense of joy. It gives me great pleasure. And this is my life. And so this is how low and degraded was Mrigari's consciousness. Even in today's very degraded Kali Yuga civilization, when we come across someone like that, still people in general will consider such a person, as mentally very low, and such a person is very, degraded. So what to speak of, thousands of years ago, in previous ages. But although Mrigari was so low, Narad Muni, by his preaching, by his outreach efforts, he was able to transform Mrigari to a pure Vaishnava of the Lord. So much so that when Narad Muni later comes and Mrigari sees him, and Mrigari wants to offer his dandavats to his spiritual master Narad Muni, but he sees there's ants on the ground. And that same hunter who previously used to half-kill animals, torture them, and feel great joy in seeing these animals suffer in pain, that same Mrigari is now feeling so compassionate upon just some small insignificant ants. And before he offers dandavats, using his dhoti, he very gently moves the ants to the side, and then he offers dandavats. And then Narad Muni is amazed to see this, or Narad Muni's friend is amazed to see this, about how powerful is the preaching of a pure devotee of the Lord. That just by a moment's association, such a great transformation can occur. So we see this in the previous spiritual masters coming in our disciplic succession, such as Narad Muni. First Krishna, he spoke this knowledge to Brahma. Brahma spoke to Narad Muni. And we see the power of Narad Muni's preaching, that he is able to convert or transform such a low person to such a great elevated devotee of the Lord. So we might think that, okay, if I was present in the previous ages, if I got directly preached by Narad Muni, that'll be something different. But actually that same potency that Narad Muni has in his preaching, that same potency is present with Srila Prabhupada. Because Srila Prabhupada is simply repeating whatever was taught to him by his guru, and his guru is simply repeating whatever was taught to him by his guru. So Srila Prabhupada's preaching is just as powerful as Narad Muni's preaching. Srila Prabhupada's preaching is just as powerful as Vyasadev's preaching. Srila Prabhupada's preaching is just as great as Brahma's preaching. Srila Prabhupada's preaching is just as great as Krishna's preaching. That's how the Guru Parampara system works. That's the potency of the Parampara system. That generations down, when a Guru is speaking, transcendental knowledge, because he is simply repeating what was taught to him by the previous spiritual masters, his potency is the same, has the same effect as what was present in the previous ages. So the same effect of potency, or the same power that Narad Muni had in his preaching, is still there with Srila Prabhupada. Narad Muni was able to convert, very low degraded persons like Mrigari. And we see Srila Prabhupada, how many degraded souls was he able to convert in the 70s? Persons who whole life they've been sinning in meat eating, drinking, gambling, illicit sex, intoxication. All these degraded souls all around the world, Prabhupada was able to convert into pure devotees of Lord, into chanting Hare Krishna, following the four regular principles, going out doing Sankirtan, dedicating their whole lives to Krishna. So we can see also scientifically how this Guru Parampara system works. It's not that, previously, there was this great, powerful preachers like Narad Muni, Brahma, Vyasadeva, Madhavacharya, but now, the gurus or the spiritual masters now present, they don't have the same potency. No, if they're following whatever was taught to them, if they're following very strictly the Guru Parampara system, their preaching will have the same effect. So in this way, Prabhupada explains, we should never lament or think that, why wasn't I born, 500 years ago during Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's time? Why wasn't I born 5,000 years ago? If I directly heard Bhagavad Gita from Krishna, if I directly heard from the mouth of Narad Muni, if I directly heard from Brahma, then, it would be a different effect. But no, actually the same effect that Brahma has in his preaching, the same effect Narad Muni has in his preaching, the same effect that Vyasadeva has in his preaching, the same effect is present at the present moment. When all of the spiritual masters we see around the world and in Srila Prabhupada's preaching, the same effect is still present. And that's how this Guru Parampara system works. That's why on the appearance day of the spiritual master, the festival is dubbed or titled as Vyasa Puja. One may think, why is it titled the spiritual master appearance day titled as Vyasa Puja? Because the spiritual master is representative of Vyasadeva. The spiritual master is respected just as good as one would respect Vyasadeva, because he's simply repeating whatever Vyasadeva said. So that's why it's considered as Vyasa Puja. And that's why Krishna, he explains to Uddhava that Acharya man vijaniyan nava manyeta karichit, that the spiritual master should be respected just as one respects me. Because why? Because the spiritual master is very strictly following whatever Krishna has taught, very strictly following whatever has been taught in the Guru Parampara system. So in this way, the spiritual master, he has a very grave and very powerful responsibility which he holds. And by very strictly following the Guru Parampara system, he is endowed with so much potency. Potency by which he can even do greater service than which was done by the previous acharyas. So materially speaking, we think that, what Krishna's preaching would have effect would be the greatest, and then when it comes from Krishna to the next level, the preaching effect will be less, and then when it goes to the next level, the preaching level will be less. And over time, as things progress, the potency of, Sankirtan would go down. But actually in the spiritual disciplic succession, it's different. It works in the opposite way. And Prabhupada explains this in Chaitanya Charitamrita. In the section of CC, where Mahaprabhu is asking Nityananda Prabhu to go preach in Bengal. In that section, Prabhupada explains that what Mahaprabhu, he himself couldn't do, he did through Nityananda Prabhu. Because Prabhupada explains, Mahaprabhu, he only preached to the very high elevated class of society, like Saprabhume Bhattacharya, and the head of the Mayavadis in Varanasi, and so on. He was only preaching to the heads of different spiritual groups who were very aristocratic and not so much degraded. But Prabhupada explains that Nityananda Prabhu, he preached to all the low degraded class, like prostitutes, gamblers, meat eaters, like Jagai Madai and so on in Bengal. So in this way, Prabhupada explains that what Mahaprabhu, he himself couldn't do, he did through Nityananda Prabhu. And Prabhupada explains that this is how the disciplic succession works. That one guru, he empowers his disciple to do even greater service than what he himself could do. And Prabhupada, he cites this example of Nityananda Prabhu and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. How Nityananda Prabhu, he did even greater service, he did even greater preaching than what Mahaprabhu he himself did. Mahaprabhu empowered his disciple or his follower Nityananda Prabhu to do even greater service, greater preaching work than what Mahaprabhu he himself could do. And Prabhupada explains that this is the nature of the parampara system. That the guru, he always, or the father, he always wants his son, or the guru always wants the disciple to better him, to do even greater service than himself. And in this way, the guru, he empowers the disciple to do even greater service. And we see the same thing with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Srila Prabhupada. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he spread the glories of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement all over India by establishing so many mats, Gaudiya mats all over India. And then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he empowered Srila Prabhupada, his disciple, to do even greater service than himself. He empowered him to take the message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to all the different towns, all the different cities and countries of the world. So in this way, the disciplic succession, it works so amazingly actually. Instead of the potency reducing over time, the potency actually increases. Each guru, they empower the disciple to do even greater service. And the same potency doesn't get lost, but rather it increases more and more by the power of Krishna. So if we just contemplate on this, some of these points, it's actually quite amazing how this whole system of Guru Parampara system works. The same potency which was present during Krishna's time, during Brahma's time, Narad Muni's time, Vyasadeva is still present now. And the potency, instead of reducing, actually it's increasing more and more. That's the nature of spiritual things. In spiritual life, spiritual world, everything increases more and more. Instead of reducing, it goes more and more. Okay, we have 2 minutes. I'll quickly finish reading the purport and we'll end the class. Vedic transcendental knowledge descends directly from the personality of Godhead. By His mercy, Brahma, the first living being in the universe, was enlightened. And from Brahmaji, Narada was enlightened. And from Narada, Vyasa was enlightened. Sukadeva Goswami received such transcendental knowledge directly from his father, Vyasadeva. Thus, the knowledge being received from the chain of the disciplic succession is perfect. One cannot be a spiritual master in perfection unless and until one has received the same by disciplic succession. That is the secret of receiving transcendental knowledge. The 6 great sages mentioned above may be great thinkers, but their knowledge by mental speculation is not perfect. However perfect an empiric philosopher may be in presenting a philosophical thesis, such knowledge is never perfect, because it is produced by an imperfect mind. Such great sages also have their disciplic successions, but they are not authorized because such knowledge does not come directly from the independent Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan. No one can be independent except Narayan. Therefore, no one's knowledge can be perfect, for everyone's knowledge is dependent on the flickering mind. Mind is material, and thus knowledge presented by material speculators is never transcendental and can never become perfect. Mundane philosophers, being imperfect in themselves, disagree with other philosophers, because a mundane philosopher is not a philosopher at all unless he presents his own theory. Intelligent persons like Maharaj Parikshit do not recognize such mental speculators, however great they may be, but hear from authorities like Sukadeva Goswami, who is non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead by the Parampara system, as is specifically stressed in the Bhagavad Gita. Kantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Jaguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Gaur Premanande.